You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% Podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
Welcome to today's episode of the 1% Podcast, the show where we interview young adults who are battling or surviving an unexpected cancer diagnosis. You are not alone, and I promise, by consuming today's content, your soul will be fed with the hope, courage, and inspiration you need to keep fighting for today. I'm excited to be on your journey with you today. If you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to 1%podcast.com to sign up for our email list to see the latest news and updates for all our guests on the show. You can also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1% Podcast. If you want to join in on some of our discussions, please join our Facebook group, the 1% Podcast. To contact me directly for content, questions, or booking events, you can email me at info@1%podcast.com. This is episode 61 of the 1% Podcast, and I hope you are ready for a truly intriguing and amazing story of hope from today's episode. Today's episode features Miss Ashley Hallford. Ashley and I actually live probably within 30 minutes of each other, but have no idea who each other were until we connected for this episode. Ashley is considered the miracle mom of 3. She's been on Megyn Kelly's Today Show and been featured in several news outlets, 700 Club, People Magazine, RedBook, all sorts of radio stations with her story. And guys, today's story is one of those that you cannot believe it until you actually hear it. I'm so glad that Ashley had a chance to meet, and we connected, and we had a chance to spend so much time together talking about what her life has been like since she was diagnosed with cancer. And her story and her outcome is just truly amazing. It's one of true faith, true hope. So guys, welcome Miss Ashley Hallford to the 1% Podcast in episode 61.
Hey, Ashley, welcome to the 1% Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So people that don't know, Ashley and I had a conversation earlier this week, and we found out that we live, 15 minutes away from each other, 15, 20 minutes away from each other? How crazy is that?
That's wild.
Small world for sure.
Yes.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. In our first conversation, it's so crazy how people get connected, right? So we live 20 minutes away from each other, but it was through several other people and a website and all these other things, how you found out about the podcast. And I know you'd reached out to me online, and then to come to find out we're so geographically close. So it was pretty hilarious. I'm excited to have you on the show. You got a very unique and powerful story. And I know you've got an awesome book that you wrote as well, too. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. So, but before we get started, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and why you feel like it's important to share your story?
Well, so like you said, my name is Ashley Hallford, and I am a mom and a wife, and obviously a survivor. And I love sharing my story. I started sharing it in 2009. So for 10 years now, I've been going to churches and conferences and all over the United States and sharing my story. And I love it because it's a story of hope, to bring hope to people. That's what I want to do. When I was diagnosed, I didn't have someone that I could look to and say, oh, wow, she's got a good story, and it encourages me. And so I want to be that for somebody.
Well, you definitely are. Just hearing your story, reading all about you, and I know you've been on several different news outlets and media outlets as well too. Just hearing your story is so amazing. And what's crazy about your story, and again, you and I have talked about this, is there's a couple of the people that I've spoken with who have a very similar situation as what we're going to talk about today, and so I think that even brings more of a need, I guess, for the awareness of the situation that we're going to talk about. All right, so you were diagnosed at 26 years old. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your life prior to your cancer diagnosis? What was Ashley like? What was Ashley doing back in the day?
Ashley had a lot more free time. When I was when I was 26, my husband and I had been married for almost 3 years, and we wanted children, but there was also a huge part of me that wanted to be an attorney. So my husband wanted to be a fireman. That was always what he wanted to do. And so he had went through EMT school and graduated and got a position at a fire department. He was doing that and finished undergraduate school at Kennesaw State University. And I was pursuing law school. I was wanting to go to Georgia State University to law school. So I had taken the LSAT, and I had average scores, nothing phenomenal, but I had a good college scores, good GPAs and things. So, and I was working for an attorney at the time. And so I tried to get into law school, applied, and my boss wrote a great letter. He was actually in law school at the time. He was not quite an attorney yet. And so I didn't get in, and I was floored because I really thought I was going to get in. So I waited a little bit. I tried again, and again, I didn't get in, and I just didn't understand. I'm the type of person who has goals in life, and I have a set way I want my life to go at that time. You know, everything was flowing in order. I had gotten married. My husband had a good job. Now I was trying to, get the job I wanted. And so all of a sudden, just something fell out of order, and I didn't like that. I don't thrive on chaos. I like it, just by the book. And so it instantly didn't, go with my plan anymore. Mm-hmm. But what I didn't know is that I was about to find out I was expecting our first child. So it threw our life out of order. But I mean, now hindsight 2020, all these years later, I can clearly see why I didn't get into law school. But that was Ashley. We were just, enjoying life.
Yeah. And then you were 26 and you were pregnant with your first child at that time. Is that right?
Yes. So I had found out I was pregnant early that year.
Yeah. So you found out you were pregnant, and then you got some other news. So why don't you tell us the news that you got, that you found out while you were pregnant with your first child?
So, let me just give you a little bit of backstory on that. When I first found out I was pregnant, literally right before I found out, I had a knot that came up right underneath my jaw. And I was worried about it a little bit. I went to the doctor, and they said it was just an infection. It was nothing to worry about. Put me on antibiotics, and it went away. Well, then I found out I was pregnant literally like a week later. And not long into the pregnancy, the knot came back. And I went back to the doctor, and again, they said, the infection didn't clear up. Put me on antibiotics, and it went away. And that went on for 8 months. This knot would come back, and they would put me on antibiotics, and it would go away. And they even did imaging on the knot because I was worried about it. And they said it really is an infection in your salivary gland. Possibly you've got stones in there, and we can't do anything about it while you're expecting. So once your baby's delivered, we'll go in and remove the stones. You won't get the infection anymore, and everything will be fine. And so that's what it was for the 8 months of the pregnancy. And finally, when I was 32 weeks pregnant, this knot stopped responding to the antibiotics. And it was hard, and it hurt. And I went to the doctor, and I said, look, this doesn't feel right. I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you I don't think it's an infection. And he said, well, I really think it is, but I'll do a biopsy on you. And so this was on a Monday. And he did the biopsy. And he called me later that night, and he said, they don't really see anything. They can't tell what's going on in there. So we're going to have some more pathologists look at it tomorrow on Tuesday, and I'll call you back. But I slept well that night because I thought, well, if it was cancer, they would see that immediately. And so on Tuesday, he called me back that evening. It was around 6 p.m. My husband was not home at the time. And when the phone rang and I answered it, he said, hey, Ashley, he said, is David with you? And I knew then that it was bad. Mm-hmm. And I said, he's not here, but I'm fine. Whatever you've got to tell me, I want you to tell me. And he went on to say that it was a tumor and that it was malignant.
Wow. So here you are. To 33 weeks pregnant?
I was 32 weeks pregnant.
32 weeks pregnant. And all of a sudden you found out you have cancer, right? So,
yes.
You're technically, 8 weeks away from having a child. And then you have cancer. That obviously changes the way, obviously, having a baby is a super exciting thing to have happen in your life. And then, then you have cancer towards the end of your pregnancy, or you find out you have cancer towards the end of your pregnancy. How did that change your mindset on having a healthy child and you being healthy and just your mindset overall?
The first thing I thought was, he has cancer too.
Mm-hmm.
If I have cancer, he has cancer. And the next morning, my obstetrician called, and they were already in the talks of inducing me so that I could have the baby immediately so I could begin treatment. And I was like, no. I don't know what's wrong with him. Does he have cancer too? And I had a million questions. I was scared to death. My mind went from being super excited, first time mom, to just devastated. Sadness, worry, fear, anxiety. I mean, every emotion you could have, I was having.
Mm-hmm.
And so but my obstetrician calmed me down. She said, the chances of the baby having cancer are very, very slim. And she said, I really think he's going to be okay, but we've got to deliver him.
Yeah. So you delivered early?
Yes. So on a Tuesday, I found out I had cancer. On a Wednesday, my obstetrician called me and said, we're delivering you. And on Saturday morning, I delivered him. And that was the day I turned the 33-week mark, was on Saturday. And I delivered him on Saturday.
So you delivered a perfectly healthy baby boy.
Perfectly healthy. Never spent 1 minute in the NICU. And the NICU doctor came by my room later that evening after I'd had him. And he talked with my husband and I, and he said, look, I've been doing this my whole life. And he was an older gentleman. He said, I've been doing this my whole life. He said, I've never seen a 33-week baby not go to the NICU. He said, at all. He said, never. He said, I've never seen that. And it was crazy.
So you had that taken care of. Now it's time to focus on you, right? Now,
Yes, now it's time to get mama healthy.
Yeah. So what type of, what was your official diagnosis and what type of treatment did they give you for your cancer?
Well, at the time, the pathologist looked at that tumor and said it was malignant. They couldn't figure out what it was. They couldn't categorize it as a carcinoma or a lymphoma or sarcoma, or they couldn't decide what it was. So that was another reason why the urgency was to deliver, because they needed to really get the tumor out and look at it. And so there was really no diagnosis yet other than it was malignant. So I had my son Harley on Saturday, and then on Wednesday of the very next week, I went in, it was the day before Thanksgiving, and had the tumor resected. And so what we saw on the outside of my jaw was like about the size of a golf ball, but when they really removed it, it was the size of a softball, and it had grown fingers and traveled up my jawbone and wrapped around it and had grown into my jaw muscle. And so they removed it, and the surgeon came to my room that evening, and he was really confident that he had gotten it all. They even severed a facial nerve. So we sacrificed a nerve to get it, to really make sure we were aggressive. And he said, you may not have to do chemo. He said, I'm really positive about this. So I was ecstatic. I'm just thinking, it's over. That's it. We're done. And there was still no official diagnosis. They were still waiting on pathology at that point. And so 2 days later, I spent that Thanksgiving in the hospital. And then 2 days later, I came home, and for a few weeks was just a mom to a newborn baby.
Wow. So obviously huge scare, right? What did they end up determining the cancer was?
So when I came home, 5 weeks passed. And during this 5 weeks, I was scrambling to harvest embryos, because if I did have chemo, the doctor had already warned me that I may not be able to have children. And so there was 5 weeks of scrambling and trying to figure out what the game plan was going to be. And the tumor was sent to the Mayo Clinic, to Dana-Farber, to Brigham Women's, because the pathologist here in Atlanta said, we don't know what it is. So I signed all kinds of release forms for it to be sent all over. And at the end of 5 weeks, my son, who was 5 weeks old at the time, he had contracted RSV, which is serious for any newborn, but especially premature. So he was put into the children's hospital, and he was really fighting for his life. It was a scary time. And while he was in the hospital, I started having double vision. And I can remember his doctors coming in the room, and I saw two of them. And I was having really bad headaches. And I went and saw an eye doctor who told me it was the stress I was under from a cancer diagnosis and everything that was going on. And it continued. And so a friend of mine said, I know this neuro-ophthalmologist right across the street from the children's hospital. You need to see him because something's not right. So I went over one day. I called and my dad actually called, and the man agreed to see me that day. And I went over, and I think he knew when he saw me what was going on, but he went on and sent me for an MRI, waited in the office. He had a golf tournament that they canceled the tournament, waited on me to come back. And when he read the MRI, he showed me, and right in the middle of my brain was a golf ball.
Oh my God.
About a golf ball sized tumor. And he said, do you see that? And I said, yes. He said, that's cancer. And so at that point, they stopped trying to figure out what I had and started treating me.
Mm-hmm.
And so still to this day, it is unknown what type of cancer I had.
Really?
If you read my actual medical reports, it says I have an undifferentiated neoplasm of unknown primary. And so they had no idea. I had no idea. I will say at one time they thought it was an angiosarcoma, and I flew to Boston and we were going to get treatment up there. Then those doctors looked at it and said, nope, it's not that. They said it looks more like a carcinoma. So then they looked for that. And then another pathologist said, no, I don't like a carcinoma. So it was just, at that point, they were like, okay, no more back and forth. Just we've got to start her on some chemo and radiation.
Wow. So you started your chemo and your radiation.
Yes.
How did that affect your body right after having, a child not too long ago, recovering from that is a huge thing. The chemo and the radiation, what did you notice that was starting to do to your body?
The chemo and radiation were terrible. The first thing that was terrible is that they put me on steroids, high doses of steroids. And one of the reasons I was having so much pain in my head, and they said the steroids will help with the inflammation. And so I instantly started gaining weight, and I just had a baby. But since he was early, I was able to go right back down to my pre-pregnancy size. So I'd lost all this weight, and then just boom, within 4 weeks, I'd gained 40 pounds on steroids. It was just, they were just pumping them through me. So that was one thing. But then I had radiation to my brain and to my neck and my face. And then when they did a full body scan to check to see if the cancer had went anywhere else, they discovered it was in both my lungs, and there was a spot on my liver.
Wow.
So it was crazy. I had head and neck radiation, and I was getting chemotherapy, and the radiation that they did to my throat damaged my esophagus. So radiation literally burns you. And so I had sores, huge sores, blisters on my tongue, the roof of my mouth, all down my throat. It really is indescribable how horrible it looked, it felt, it tasted. It was terrible. That probably was one of the worst things. Was the sores on my, all in my mouth.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
What was the name of the chemo they put you on?
I was on carboplatin, cisplatin, and Taxotere.
Okay. So the palladium drugs are known for being some of the hardest and the roughest ones on you and stuff. Going through your chemo and radiation, obviously that's not what you had planned for your life. You wanted to be a lawyer, like you just had your first child, and now you're having to go through chemo and radiation. Your life's completely different. What do you feel like that did to your perception on life? Because lots of times when we go through traumatic events, it can make us question things a little bit, right? Like, why this happened to me? Why am I here? God, why'd you allow this to happen to me? And all these questions, right? And even like in your marriage, like you hadn't been married for a couple of years, right? So it's like, why is this happening now? What do you feel like it did to your mindset, knowing that you had so much happen at a young age?
Well, that was one of the things that was the hardest, is while I was going through this, I kept asking God why, because me and my husband went to church. We both went to Christian school. And so we had been raised in a Christian environment. We served God. I'd actually worked in the bus ministry for a long time at my church. And I just thought, why, God? Why am I having to go through this? And for the longest time, I didn't get an answer. Mm-hmm. And one day, my Sunday school teacher, he said, why not you? What makes you so much better than anyone else that you don't have to go through a trial in life? And boy, that was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
But after, years later, I look back at my life and I was so and I mean, I still am to a degree because I'm just a very organized. I like things neatly done and in order. But before cancer, everything, I wanted to be in control of everything. I needed it to go in a certain way at all times. And if something deviated from that plan, I couldn't take it. And I think that God brought this into my life for several reasons. But I think one of the reasons is for him to say, look, you're not in control.
Right.
You never were. You never will be. And I think he needed me to see I had to lose control, hence the title of my book, to be able to draw closer to him and learn how to lean on him and depend on him.
I think it's really easy to, buy into the philosophy, we get what we deserve, right? Like you live.
Right, yes.
Good things are supposed to happen to me. But
yes.
Obviously, throughout life, and when I think about that, one of the first things I always think about is, all the people that died at 9/11, right? Like, just went to work that morning and died.
Right.
And, who probably, tremendous amount of wonderful people who passed away that day, didn't really get what they deserved, and I think about that as just being an American, like the biggest thing that's happened to us in our lifetime and stuff.
Yes.
And it makes sense for people to, one of the first questions we ask ourselves was, well, why me? What did I do to deserve this? I know I thought the same thing. I tried to go back in like my life and pick out all the moments that, did I do this to cause this situation? Right. Like,
yeah.
Did I do this wrong? Like, and it's funny because, especially, us that grow up in like the Christian community, sometimes we think bad things happen. God is punishing us. Right. Which is not the case. Like that's definitely not always the case. Right.
No, it's not.
And, so I think that's really good to hear you say that, because that's a misconception lots of times. Well, if you always live a certain way, nothing bad will happen to you, and all these things happen. But that's totally not the case.
No, it is not.
You bring up the fact that you had to lose control. I think most of us who are intentional about our lives, who want to be good people and do the right thing, we make conscious effort to do those things. And which is great. It's wonderful. And I think that's what we're called to do. But sometimes, when we, wrap our arms or our hands around something so tight, there's no room for anything else or anybody else. And I know it's really easy to do that with your life too. It's like, this is my life. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to follow this course because this is what I want to have happen. Right. And that's, at the end of the day, like, that's not how we're called to live our life, right? Our lives, we've learned this, like your life's not necessarily your own. Like, you were created for a specific reason. And just because you want to go do something, you want your life to be a certain way, you have to have certain experiences, right? I was telling someone the other day, like, if life was perfect, we'd all be terrible human beings, right? If you got everything you wanted all the time.
Right.
I'm sure your kids would say the same thing. Like if you gave your kids everything you wanted, you'd have some feral children over there, right? Who wouldn't do anything. It
would not be good.
So, and I know that's the kind of way I look at life too. Like, we want our lives to be free of pain, free of trauma, free of stuff, but that's not always the case. And lots of times through those moments, we learn so much, and it's such a deeper meaning. And it's also a reminder too. And you just brought this up a second ago that, again, you don't always get what you deserve. Like, and going through a situation like this where your life, I think you start to realize like your life is just bigger than what you can imagine it would be. Right. Right. And certain circumstances and the people that I've spoken to that, that have cancer, that, become survivors, their life is, one way. The people that have cancer that don't survive, either way, whether you survive or you don't survive, the method's still the same. Your life is still not your own. And there's so many things that people can do if they only live a short amount of time, that could be way more impactful than someone who does live out longer, and then vice versa as well too. Right.
So yes, exactly.
how quick you get what you're supposed to be doing. And sometimes, I do believe that traumatic events really have a way of grabbing your attention a lot quicker than other things as well too.
Yes, they do.
But going back to your story, your chemo, your radiation, you're kind of like wrestling with your control of your life and stuff. Let's talk about like what happened after that. So you finish up your chemo, your radiation, you start getting your scans, your checkups, right?
Right.
What happened after that? Did the doctors come back and was everything completely gone, or what was your process like?
So I was on the chemotherapy for a couple of months, and they decided to rescan me, and they rescanned me, and it was growing. The doctor said it's like it's fertilizing it. Mm-hmm. And so the tumors I had in my lungs were growing, the ones they marked, and there were more of them. And my actual scan says there are innumerable tumors present on both lungs. And I remember asking her, which is kind of stupid at the time, looking back, but I said, what does that mean? She said, it literally means they cannot count them all. Mm. That's how many tumors there are on your lungs. And I just thought, this is it. I'm not going to make it through this. And so my church as soon as those scans came back so bad, and my doctor, I really felt at that point had kind of lost hope. My church took on a full month and decided to fast and pray for me for 1 full month. And so they just put a calendar down on the bottom of a communion table in front of the church, and people came by and signed up. So sure enough, for a whole month, the calendar was full. 2 or more people fasted and prayed every day, or for not the whole month, one person picked a day. So that was in, I believe, March. And so I continued. They did change my chemotherapy. I was on, I say carboplatin, cisplatin, Taxotere. It was like carboplatin and Taxotere. Then they switched it to cisplatin and Taxotere. Mm-hmm. They switched it up, and I continued that chemotherapy for another couple of months. And at the end of that, it was time to go back for scans again. And I just thought, I need to have some positive news. If there's nothing positive, they don't even know what I have. So they're going to say, we don't know what else to do, and send me home. Because they'd already given me that option. They'd already told me I could just go home. And I told them, no way. So I just prayed. I told the Lord, I said, Lord, if you don't do something, just a little something, they're going to give up. And so I went for the results, and my oncologist, I always tell her she looks like a little Barbie doll. And she come in, and her big old stiletto heels clicking in, and she sat down at the desk, and she said, I'm just going to read you exactly what the radiologist report says. And I said, okay. And it kind of scared me, because I thought that don't sound good. And when she sat down and read it, she said, the radiologist report says that there's no evidence of disease present. And she looked at me. And again, this is stupid looking back. And I said, what does that mean? Because, I was so scared and thinking that there was going to be bad news. I just built myself up for that. Again, no faith, just very little faith there. Mm-hmm. And, she said, she kind of snickered, and she said, it's gone. She said, it's gone. She said, you're in remission. My mom and my husband had went with me. And so we were all crying. And after everybody calmed down, she looked at me, and she was crying. And she said, I never thought I would say that to you. And she said, a few months back, when you just were so driven to keep going, she said, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's the right decision. And, she was just shocked. Everybody was shocked. But I'm telling you, I really think my church taking a whole month and fasting and praying really made a huge difference, because and people around the world, it wasn't just my church, my pastor preaches in different countries. And so he had contacted everybody he knew, and people were contacting everybody. And so, there were people in Australia and England, all over the country. All over the world, in different countries, praying for me. And I really believe that God heard all of those prayers and said, I've got to do something for this girl. Mm-hmm. And my doctor, I believe that everybody was praying for her wisdom too. I've been accused that I don't give medical science and my doctors credit. And I do. Mm-hmm. I do believe that they had a lot of wisdom, and they were very educated and making wonderful decisions on my behalf. And during that month of prayers, when she switched the chemo. And I believe it's because we were all praying for her, and she had the wisdom to say, well, this one may work better. And she switched it up. And that was game changer for me.
Yeah, I mean, you were actually taking chemo, you know what I mean? So it's not like that you weren't doing anything on your own or
right. Yeah.
Anything, right? You brought this up, and I'm very well aware of the fasting situation, but there may be some people listening today that they think about fasting. I guess some people go, most people probably know fasting obviously is going without food, right?
Right.
And we think of like intermittent fasting, us like people that are athletic, and we go.
I actually do that.
Right. And it's like a health thing, but from a spiritual standpoint in the Christian community, fasting's completely different.
Right. Yes.
Fasting is an act of sacrifice, basically. And
yes.
Can you describe, I'd like to hear it in your words, to the people maybe that aren't like familiar with, fasting in the Christian community, what that means and why people do it, and, what the anticipated outcome is.
So my belief on fasting is that when you fast, so when my church did, it was a 24-hour period.
Mm-hmm.
So say it started at 7 a.m. So someone would say, I'm going to fast beginning at 7 a.m. to the following day at 7 a.m. And you deprive your physical man
mm-hmm.
of food. So we drink water during that time. Mm-hmm. But for 24 hours, you're depriving your physical self of the food, and you're just fueling yourself for that 24 hours with spiritual food mm-hmm. and getting in the Word of God and praying. And, we believe that when you're depriving your physical self, your spiritual self is just thriving, and you're able to just take in some more and so much more and be closer with, just have a closer connection with God. That's our view on fasting. And so why people would do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good way of explaining that. So fasting is a self deprivation in a way, like it's a self-sacrifice.
Right.
And the theory behind fasting is you're sacrificing your needs, desires, and wants, and and they do that by food, because going without food a certain amount of time gives you like hunger pangs and all other things like that you have with that, and it's an unnatural way to sacrifice typically, right? No one wants to go a day without eating on purpose.
Yeah.
But in that time, like every reminder you get that you're hungry is almost a reminder that you're doing this. You're giving up part of your day, part of your, your food, in order to really, concentrate on your relationship with God and communicate with God in a way that, again, kind of like what I said earlier, when you have a traumatic event, that's lots of times when people start looking around and wondering, it's not the best way to have your spiritual relationship, but when bad things happen, that's one of the first things people like reach out for, right? And
right.
So on like a daily basis, when people choose to sacrifice their hunger and everything for the thought of and the prayers for someone else, I think that that's a really powerful and important thing. And if anyone's listening right now and has any kind of questions about that, you guys can always like email me, or we can talk about that on a side note or anything along those lines. But, in your situation where you have people, what you're doing, like your people as a community are coming around a person who has, an illness or a traumatic event, and they're really digging in deep with their faith, and they're reaching out to other people, and they're communicating through fasting, through prayer, through, just conversations about this one person. And, if you think about, you being that one person that's in the middle of all that, like how powerful is it to know that you have a community all over the world that's thinking about you, that's praying for you, that's sacrificing for you? That's a very, very powerful thing. And, just from like an energetic standpoint, like people are, spending a ton of energy just for you. And I think that's such a amazing and humbling experience, very right?
Humbling. Yes.
That so many people would sacrifice part of their day that maybe don't know you that well, just right, for the hope and the faith that you would be healed, or people would get the correct knowledge to heal you as well too. And I think that's such an amazing thing. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I don't think we've talked about that with anyone on the podcast so far. So, the doctor comes in and she tells you that you're NED, and, it's a huge sense of like probably a belief and disbelief, right? It's like, wait, what?
Right.
What did you say? And is this really true? Is it going to come? And everybody thinks about it. Is it going to come back? Like all those things, right?
Yep. First question.
Yeah. How long do I have to wait until this and that and everything? But you guys go home, and I'm sure the sun's brighter. Food smells better.
Oh yes, we baked a cake that day
Yeah.
to celebrate.
You have more of an appreciation of love for your husband and your kids,
Yes.
and your family, and just life in general. I heard this recently. I was at a conference, and the guy I was talking said that you don't learn how to live your life. A lot of people don't learn how to live their life as well as somebody who's had a near-death experience. And clearly, this is one of those circumstances for you. How do you feel like your life has been different since, this huge cancer scare and this, amazing gift of life that you were given after your diagnosis?
Me and my husband get asked this question a lot. How have our lives changed?
Mm-hmm.
And first and foremost, it changed our relationship with God for sure. I always tell people we were like God in a box on a shelf Christians.
Mm-hmm.
God was good on Sundays and we loved him. But then during the work week, we were like, we got this, God.
Yeah.
And so we've learned that, that's not the case. God needs to never be in a box, and he's right there with you. And then it's changed our relationship, as newlyweds. It's an adjustment when you get married.
Right.
You're like living with something. You dated this person, but then to live with this person, it's a little bit different. So it was an adjustment when we got married. And so we would fight about these little things, but we learned going through this changed, how we look at each other, and just the little things, they don't mean anything. We're just like, whatever, let it go. That's not worth a fight. That's not worth an argument. You just appreciate that person so much more and realize how quickly life can change, and that person could be gone. It's changed, I feel like I was very much a family person before, but I am so much more of a family person. That's so important, that time spent with your loved ones and your friends, because you just realize how fragile that life really is. It truly is a vapor. It's here and gone in a blink. And so we just appreciate each other. We appreciate every day. Literally, there are some days where I take a breath, and I'm not making this up. I will take a breath and I'll say, thank you, Lord. Mm-hmm. Because that's a breath 11 years ago, they didn't think I'd even take another breath. So I appreciate that breath.
And we were joking about this earlier before we started recording. Today is a very special day. We didn't even plan this, but today is your 11-year remission anniversary. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Huge thing. I'm so honored to be sharing that today with you. Like I said, we didn't even plan it that way. We didn't realize it until a few minutes ago. But 11 years. I'm sure these past crazy. 11 years have been completely different than the ones before that. So sometimes with all of the medication, the chemo and everything else, our bodies don't like that in the long run, right? Because it's poison, right? So we're poisoning our body to try to eliminate these tumors and stuff. So you were told that you guys probably weren't going to be able to have children, right?
Right. Yeah.
Can you walk us through that situation? So you were told you weren't going to have children, so you guys started preparing for adoption and surrogates and all those things like that, right?
Right.
Through your infertility process as well. I think that's a really good topic to bring up.
Yes. When right after I had my surgery to remove the original tumor, and my son was just a few weeks old, the doctor had told us that was actually one of the first things I was worried about, more than even the cancer. was that I would never be able to have children again. And she said, sure, it's really a very real possibility. So we started trying to harvest embryos, and she only told me I had a few weeks. She said, you got a few weeks. I'm only going to let you try one time before we might need to go ahead and jump into treatment. And so we tried to harvest embryos, and it was a complete failure. And they told me no more time. We got to jump into treatment. So then fast forward to after I was in remission about 3 years. It's funny. He was almost 4 years old, my son at the time, and he prayed for a baby sister, specifically a sister. His Sunday school teachers would find us in the hall at church and say, oh, he prayed for y'all again this morning that he would have a baby sister. It was hilarious. I mean, but he prayed. He always wanted to pray over the food. He prayed for a baby sister. So we told the Lord, look, the doctors have said it's not possible. And if it's not possible, you're going to have to replace that desire in his heart, because he's only 4 and we don't know how to explain that to him. And so we just prayed about it. We were open to adoption. We still were seeking out fertility treatments using a surrogate possibly. And so we were pursuing that avenue. And on a Monday in February of 2012, we went to the fertility doctor for results from a bunch of testing we had done, got our surrogate, and the doctor sat down and she said, look, she said, I'm going to be honest. She said, it's not possible. And that day on Monday, they had done an ultrasound on me, blood work, everything. And she said, she said, if I wasn't looking at you in the face and I was looking at the lab work, she said, I would swear I was looking at somebody in their mid 50s. Mm-hmm. She said, it's just, the chemo, you're menopausal. She said, you're really just menopausal at this point. So she said, I'm wasting your time and your money, and so I really think you should pursue adoption. So we left. We were sad, but still different perspective from a few years back. I was still just thankful to be alive, thankful that my son was alive and healthy. So I was sad, yes, but still it was okay. That was on a Monday. On Thursday, my son was having a little outpatient procedure done, and so we were at the hospital for that. And I was set to have an outpatient procedure done the following Monday, so I'd already went for pre-op lab work and things. We're at the hospital with my son, and my surgeon's office calls. And the nurse said, there's a problem with your lab work, and it says you're pregnant. I said, no, it's not possible. I just went to the doctor on Monday, the fertility doctor. I even had an ultrasound in her office. I promise you I'm not pregnant. She agreed to repeat the lab work. She repeated the lab work on Friday and called me, and she said, you're definitely pregnant. And I went back to the fertility doctor that following week. So it had just been like 9 days since I had seen her that past Monday. And she said, absolutely no way possible for you to be pregnant ever again. And they did an ultrasound, and there was a little bit heart beating. And sure enough, I was pregnant.
Wow. And
that pregnancy just went off without, no problems at all. No problems. And I delivered a little girl, just like my son prayed for, a little girl. And I delivered her in October. Now years have passed now, and I always ask him, like, you still wish you had prayed for a sister? He's like, no. So then some years later after that, she was about 4, and she wanted a sibling. She wanted a brother. And she started praying. And my son, he was like, I want a brother so bad. And they started praying. And I said, look, we're not doing, me and my husband were like, we're not even about to try fertility. We're not doing anything. We're fine. We're happy. And I was about to have just a routine MRI. And they always, make me have a pregnancy test because they don't want to give the contrast eye if you're pregnant. And I took it, and it was positive. And I actually took it a couple more times because I didn't believe it. But sure enough, I was pregnant again. And then we had a little boy in 2017. It's funny, about 6 or 9 months ago, my kids were like, oh, we want another sibling. We're going to pray. I said, no more praying for mommy to have babies. Mommy is done.
So here you are, pregnant with your first child, 26 years old, get diagnosed with a, undescribable cancer, just a numerous amount of tumors they can't even count. You have your child, perfectly healthy baby boy. You go through your cancer situation. They talk about there's pretty much no chance. You're menopausal at a young age. You won't be able to have children. You have your next child, and then a couple years later you end up having another child. So you've had 2 children. So infertility is a huge issue amongst a lot of people in the cancer community. Sometimes people get warned to, sperm bank or either, preserve their eggs and stuff ahead of time. Some people don't. Some people don't even have a choice.
Right.
You didn't even have a choice with your situation, and they get told that things aren't going to work out in a situation like that. That's a very, I think, tough thing for some people to deal with sometimes, when it comes down to, really wanting to be a parent. And here you are having an opportunity to be a parent twice over after that situation. So that's a huge blessing for you. I'm sure you guys treat it that way.
Yes, it is a big blessing.
Yeah. So you've been able to share your story on you were on Megyn Kelly's Today Show.
Yes.
You shared it on the 700 Club and 104.7 The Fish, and a couple other magazines too. Is that correct?
Right. Yes. It was the online publication for People magazine and for RedBook magazine and the USA Today online. All of those were online publications. They did articles on our story.
So people, can look at your story as a huge testament of faith, I think, in a lot of ways. And, your story being so like dramatic and having so many phenomenal outcomes and stuff, that's something that people need to obviously hear more about, right? So you decided that it'd be a good opportunity to put all this down on paper. And you just launched a book recently. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your book.
For 1 year.
Yeah, tell us about your book. It's called Losing Control.
I wanted to write a book for a long time. For several years, I tried to. And I'm a math person, not an English person. And so I never could get the words out right. And finally, about 2 years ago, I told the Lord, I said, every time I go speak, people are like, oh, you should write a book. We want to hear more. And I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I really want to write a book. And I feel like you want me to write a book, but for some reason I'm having trouble. And you know that I'm not a good writer. And so if that's your will, help me make it work. And I prayed for that. And I'm not kidding you, a week after I had prayed that specific prayer, a friend of mine, and I knew her more through my husband because they had went to the same church. Before we had got married, they'd went to the same church. And so I knew her. We had become friends. And she reached out to me. She's an Army wife. And so she was living in Kansas at the time, so not even near me, but she reached out to me. And she said, look, she said, I had this overwhelming feeling from the Lord that I needed to reach out to you and ask you, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, Stephanie, you're not going to believe this. I said, about a week ago, I prayed that the Lord would send me somebody, if he really wanted me to write this book, to help me along the way. And she was like, it's me. And so she is the English person, the writer. And so she and I together for a year over voice recordings and just several long nights, late nights, we worked together diligently and got the book down. And we self-published it. It's not published through a publisher. We really hope in the future that we could get it, a publisher to pick it up. But we self-published it, and it's available on Amazon. But it really is more than just my story. It's the story of what cancer not did to me like physically, but taught me spiritually and emotionally, and how it changed my life and how I had to lose control to see that I was never in control. And it's just so much more than, hey, I had cancer and this is what happened and now I'm here. So I'm so thankful that God sent her to me and that we worked through that and we got it published, and it's just been a blessing. If it never makes it to a publisher's desk, I mean, I'm happy with it. I'm thrilled that we got it down.
Yeah, I definitely am excited to get a copy of it and check it out. What would you say would be like 2 or 3 lessons people could learn from reading your book, Losing Control?
I would say that obviously the biggest lesson, which we've talked about, is that, that you're not in control of your life. That obviously is the biggest lesson. That, you have to realize that, well, and the Bible says, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. He's going to have to bring you to just maybe nothing, where, I say there's that quote, when God is all you have left, you find out that God is all you need. That's really what I got to. Mm-hmm. I got to a point where when the cancer had spread, and even on chemo it was spreading, there was nothing left. I really think the doctors were clueless and hopeless, and that we had nothing left but God. And I think when we saw that, we were like, that's it, God, you're it. We realized that, and he was like, that's what I needed you to see. I needed you to see that you had no control over this. And now that you see that, now you'll see that I'm all you ever needed. So, that is, I think, the whole premise of the book is just, you've got to realize you're not in control of your life. But secondly, a big thing that is in my book about how to deal with cancer and how I got through it. And the biggest thing is I had the best support team ever. And that's what people ask me a lot. Well, how do you get through this? What piece of advice do you give people? And I'd say, you need a support. You need the support, whether it's your family or you have a church family, your coworkers, your friends. You need to get a group of people that are going to rally around you, that are going to bring you, if it's a yogurt parfait at midnight because you've got sores in your throat and that's all you can eat. You need somebody that you can call. So you've got to get a support system. And I really talk about that in my book. And, people have said that, man, that was so helpful to me to read, that, you've had all these people supporting you, and that helped me.
Yeah, I love that. So I got a question. As you were talking a second ago, I got a question for you. So, you said something about, God getting people's attention through, trauma or through circumstances and stuff, right? So I think a lot of people will be curious, and this is going to be different answer for everybody. So the answer isn't like a blanket answer that everyone has to agree with or go with and stuff, because it's probably different for everybody. But what did he get your attention for? Clearly it's, not just the way you live your life, but what do you feel like God's gotten your attention for?
Again, this is maybe, like you said, everybody's going to have a different answer. I feel like I was talking about God in a box on a shelf. We've loved God, we served God, and I think God saw that, or maybe, that in life we didn't have him first, and he was just, something there if we needed him. Like, oh, so-and-so's got to have surgery. Oh, God, come here. Let me pull you out of the box real quick so I can pray for this person. And I really think he did all of this to show me that, look, you can't keep me as like your standby. I'm not somebody that's just here if you need. I need to be here all the time. I need to be here for every decision you make, in the little things, the big things, the non-important things, the big important things. I need to be in every aspect every day. And that's really one of the biggest lessons I learned, is that, I need to have God a part of everything. I mean, me and my husband tell people this, and they think it's so funny. And I mean, it is funny, but it's serious to us. We needed a new mattress several years ago, but it was after my remission. And we didn't have the money at the time to go get it. So we were going to have to just finance it, and we were going to go get the mattress. And we came back home that night to think about it. And I told him, I was like, well, let's just pray about it and figure out if this was the right one or whatever. We prayed about it, and God, I couldn't even tell you the scripture now, but there was a scripture I read that night before bed, and whatever it read, it was just like God spoke to me through that and said, it's not right. It's not time. And you know what? The next morning he said the same thing. He was like, I don't know why. It's like, but I don't feel like God wants us to buy that mattress. And it's funny. It's so little. It's a mattress. We're talking about a mattress, and we didn't go buy it. We didn't. And a couple of years later, we were able to get a mattress. And people look at that and they're like, oh my goodness, for real? Yes, for real. It's just the little things. It's God. Really, it was a wake up call. Like God was saying, I can't be in a box. I'm either going to be in your life, or I'm not going to be in your life. And here's your wake up call.
If we trust in the small things, then, how can we ask for the big things if we can't trust in the small things kind of situation?
Exactly.
And, just to kind of translate some of that for some people out there that are listening right now who maybe, have a different, faith that they practice, or have no faith at all, or whatever, or even having the same, just maybe disagree. Everybody's got their own opinions for stuff. Right. But just kind of translate that a little bit. It all comes down to a relationship. Right. And, whenever, that's our calling is, to have a relationship, I think a deep relationship with our Creator. And whether it's through crazy circumstances that drive us to that, or it's just a daily, repetition to get in that, frame of mind. I look at it like, obviously it's the bigger relationship. I look at it like every other relationship. The more time you spend talking to your husband, typically the better relationship you guys are going to have, right?
Yes.
If you get mad and fight and don't talk to each other for a week, every week, it's not going to be a great situation, right? Or if you spend time with each other and then you don't have anything to do with each other, like no other relationship is going to work like that. So how can we expect, our relationship with our Creator to work the same way?
Yes.
And, you think about like the very reason we were here, and, what we're called to do, and the joy and the peace and the grace and the mercy that we have in our life. Like everyone has something to be grateful for, even people who are terminally ill with cancer. And I've talked to people, some that they're honestly, like I've talked to tons of people with cancer and several people that are terminal. And I feel like they are happier than most of the people that, life seems normal in a lot of ways. The amount of gratitude that we have, gratitude to me, like happiness comes and goes, right? Happiness is like, hey, I got, extra Oreos in my ice cream or something like that, right?
Yes.
But joy, like happiness is all in the mind, right? Like it's good moments, good bad moments.
Right, exactly.
Joy is in the spirit. And
you're exactly right.
Having like a joyful spirit doesn't come from something good happening. It comes from like peace. And that's, for us to have a relationship and pursue a relationship with God, like that's what we're pursuing, is that peace, that all encompassing peace where you can have joy throughout the midst of any situation, whether it's a good or bad situation. And every time, and people that I haven't, even in my circle, that or that I'm acquainted to in some way that maybe don't share my beliefs and stuff, they still see that peace, and that people can see that peace and see that joy and wonder, how in the world could this guy have all these things happen to him and still live this way, or still, say these things or do these things. And, people can see that. Like that's evidence. Faith is something there's no like physical evidence of lots of times, right?
Yes.
But people can see and feel your joy. And those always lead to other questions. Well, why does he have joy with this and this? And then there's an opportunity to share and talk about our relationship and stuff. And I feel like all of us that are in the cancer community, no one wants cancer. You don't have to get cancer to all of a sudden live a great life, or you don't have to have cancer to have a better relationship with God or have a relationship with God, period. But just the traumatic event, it makes you evaluate life in general. Yes, and as you're going through life and you're going through your spiritual journey, your physical, your emotional, your financial, like, cancer affects all those things.
Yes, it does.
It really makes you reevaluate everything and kind of get in line. So your book, Losing Control, it's on Amazon. You have people can connect with you through your website, ashleyhallford.com. It's ASHLEYHALLFORD.com. I'll drop links to that as well too. One last question I ask people, typically at the end of most of the podcasts that I do, is, what do you think the best thing that's happened to you? Like what's the best thing cancer's done for you in your life? Which is a pretty kind of creepy question to ask people, because it's like, but I love getting the answers to this. So what's the best thing cancer's done for you in your life?
It's opened so many doors. The people I get to meet and speak to, and the relationships I've made, that has been so rewarding. Meeting these people and talking to them. I would have never been to some of the states I've even been to and met these people and talked with them. And I feel like I have this network of friends now, and we all kind of know what each other's been through. And it's just the friends I've made, the doors that's been opened. And, in the book I talk about, me and Stephanie, when we were writing it, we wrote, at first it said, I'm thankful for cancer in one of the chapters. And I said, oh, no. No, I'm not thankful for cancer because I've lost family members. My aunt died of brain cancer. I had a cousin who died of cancer. So we've been on the other side of cancer too, where we've lost loved ones. So I'm not thankful for cancer, but we reworded that to say, I'm thankful for what cancer taught me. And the relationships it's built and the things I've seen and the stories I've heard. I mean, I think I've got a crazy story, and then I hear some crazier stories, and then the people that come up to me. I've had a couple of people in my church that when I first was diagnosed and all the prayer and fasting started, these people just came into our church and they were baby Christians. They'd just been saved. And those people came up to me years later and they said, you know what? You taught me how to pray. And they didn't mean me, obviously, but it was my story.
Yeah.
They said, you were the first prayer I prayed and I saw an answer to it. And I mean, that kind of stuff, I would have never had that kind of stuff, those kind of experiences. And it's just, all of that. There's just so much.
Yeah. I think that answers your question sometimes too, like why this happened to me for all these other people in a way,
Yep.
We'll take a minute to acknowledge you for our conversation. I love just the communication that we've had, like the way we've been able to talk through a lot of these things that not necessarily everybody knows about and people have experienced before, and just your story in general, as wild as it is. The way you're humble to tell your story and transparent and confident about your story and all the people that you've shared this with all across the world, and people get to look in your eyes when you're on television and really see that you're telling like a true, crazy, raw story and see all the great things that have happened from that. And you've been able to establish a community that's around your story, which I think is so important. Community is one of the fruits of life that we all have to partake in, because we're all in this together, right? Like no one's
right.
We may feel alone. I'm sure there's moments where you felt completely alone, but
sure,
we're not in this together. Like you said, someone bringing you an ice cream late at night just because your throat was hurting, right? Like we're not in this by ourselves. And I thought that's something that I would really want people to, to really hear that and feel that. If you feel like you're by yourself, you can reach out to Ashley through her website, ashleyhallford.com. You can check out her book. You can email me. We can have these conversations because you aren't alone. You have people that are going to be here for you, not to try to solve all your problems, but just to listen to you, just to be another person in the room.
Yeah.
And, I think that's such an important thing. So your story, hearing your story, being able to share your story with so many people, is just creating more and more opportunities for us all to come together. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. And thank you for being such a great guest and sharing your story on the podcast. I'm so excited to see all the feedback we're going to get from people, hearing your story and checking out your book and all those wonderful things. So Ashley, thank you again for being a guest on the show. And we'll keep everyone posted on what your life has going on next. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been blessed to be a part of it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.